latest and greatest episode in the Metaphysical Corner. And in this book, we had done a chapter on the magical power of chemical bonds, and the next one talks about chemical reactions. Now, I read that, I saw, there's no real reason, so to speak, to go through that chapter. It really doesn't add to our knowledge a great deal, and it's really stuff we don't need to know. But not to say chemical reactions aren't important. They drive you, they drive life. But how they happen is, for example, with chemical reactions, I guess the number one thing to remember, if someone talks about chemical reactions, of course, with an atom, you have your nucleus with its protons and neutrons and the electrons going around the outside. Chemical reactions are strictly with the outer shell electrons. The nucleus of the atom and the inner shells of the electrons are not involved whatsoever. It is strictly, and I mean strictly, a outer ring, usually exchange of electrons. The way it works, just real simple, and what summing up what that entire chapter says is, as far as the, once again, you look at what they call the standard electron. You have your nucleus, you have in your first shell, you got 2 electrons. And then the second shell is 8. And then the third is 16. And the atom itself is happiest when the outer shell, whatever it is full. That's why, to give an example, carbon. Carbon has, in its outer shell, has 4. Well, it likes 8 because the second shell holds up to 8. It's happiest when there's 8. That's why he bonds so easily to 4 other elements that each got 1 electron to give, and they share. Others is, for example, the ones that have in their outer shell have 1 electron. The ones I can think of is sodium and I think potassium, and they like to lose that electron so that what was the second shell is now becomes the outer shell, and it's already full. Just to give you an example, so it's just so you have the understanding of one of the greatest examples of this, and it's one called ionic bonding, is sodium chloride, which is of course salt. Ordinary table salt we use on the roads and that type of thing. It's NaCl, sodium chloride. Actually, sodium, I'm trying to remember now. Okay, yeah, it's Na plus Cl minus. Okay, what happens is the sodium has 1 electron in its outer shell. The chlorine has 7 in its outer. So the sodium is more than happy to say to chlorine, here, have that electron. Now, when he does, he becomes positively charged. He's got 1 less electron than the number of protons in his nucleus. And the chlorine gets that electron, and now he becomes negatively charged because he's got 1 more electron than his number of protons than he is. Plus and minus subtract, and you have ordinary table salt. Ions are extremely common in the human body, and that's where you have an uneven number of protons in the nucleus and electrons going around. No, it does not. It changes the chemical characteristics, but it doesn't change what the element is. It's important to remember the number of protons in the nucleus determines what element it is. For example, sodium. I forget the number. I think it's 23. It's the number of protons in the nucleus. and electrons going around it, when it loses that one outer shell electron, he becomes positively charged because he still has 23 protons, but now he's only got 22 electrons. But that becomes an ion because he becomes positively charged because he's lost an electron. But it's still a sodium atom. Okay, I know this can be a little difficult to understand. You think it would change everything, but it's not. The important thing here is just to remember that the number of protons in the nucleus is what determines which element it is. We could rip away actually all the electrons going around a sodium nucleus. It would become sodium plus 23, because it would be just a sodium nucleus with 23 protons and however many electrons, neutrons are in it, but still a sodium proton or sodium nucleus. So that's where the distinction must be made. So that's all I want to say about chemical reactions. Just remember, chemical reactions are something that happens strictly in the outer shells of their atoms. The nucleuses and the inner electrons are not involved at all. And I didn't want to blow that off, but it is an important. Well, I take that back. There's no such thing as not important. It's not as important as what we're going to talk about now, and that's energy. We've talked about energy time and time again. Even consciousness is energy, and energy is consciousness. Okay? Now we're starting to get into the the meat of what is going on with consciousness and life in general. Excuse me. And there's 3 laws of what they call thermodynamics, which are inescapable and which we have never found an exception to them. Now, one thing they say that has happened throughout history is things that were always held as absolutes found to be not so absolute. For example, Einstein's theory of relativity blew away a lot of stuff. The advent of quantum physics has blown away a lot and will blow away a lot more. There is a possibility, in my opinion, there is, I think even Stephen Hawking, who just died this week, so that'll date this broadcast or this video. He was the one, he often said there is something else out there. He wanted the what they call the grand unified theory, which Einstein worked on too. I would not be shocked if there is physics, math, that has not been discovered yet. As advanced as it is, there may be, what we know at the forefront, which didn't exist 50, 100 years ago. There still may be stuff out there that we have no idea of what could be. So I would love to go forward 500 years from now and see what we're doing, but of course can't do that. But irregardless, as of right now, for the time being anyway, as says the first law, we cannot make or destroy energy. Maybe in time, with sufficiently advanced technology, this may not be true. But for the moment, it certainly is. The first law of thermodynamics is the best known of the 3 laws. Energy corresponds to the capacity of a system to modify another system. Having energy means the ability to do lots of things, to do things well. To do things means to modify a portion of the molecular soup that we're in. And basically, I think I've said it before, our use of energy, we're converting energy from one form to another to do work. Whatever it is, light up your room, drive your car, whatever it may be, it all is conversion of energy from one form or shape to another. When we have energy, we often spend it much without that because we know we can replenish it, primarily by eating, drinking, and sleeping. We draw our energy from the outside, but are we able to manufacture it? With all our intelligence and power, we do not have the ability to create energy for ourselves or for anyone else. Though we often speak about the production or loss of energy, this is an abuse of language that is not true. We can use energy, transform it, or even store it, but we cannot create it. We manipulate it, if only to a certain extent, but we can't make it. This is what the first law of thermodynamics states, unequivocally. Energy can never be created, and it can never be destroyed. And that kind of goes against our nature as human beings. We think everything can be destroyed at one time or another. In this case, no. In other words, the amount of energy throughout the universe is basically constant. It constantly varies in its composition, which kind it is, but it's always constant. We'll get to that. Nature is our only source of energy. That makes sense. This gift of nature is our inheritance and our true wealth. Without energy, a system has no impact on the world. Energy is produced by wind, rain, oceans, rivers, plants, and animals, but mostly by the sun, with its heat and light. Without the heat of the sun, temperatures of the earth would be hundreds of degrees lower, there would be no life here. We are unable to produce energy just as we are unable to produce a baby in a laboratory. There is no synthetic or artificial energy. In other words, energy is imperishable and indestructible. It seems like during the Big Bang, all the energy of the world, and for that purpose, the universe, was allocated once and for all. Since then, its amount has neither increased nor diminished, nor can it disappear. However, even though energy is indestructible, it can move from one thing or system to another. In other words, it circulates like a fluid. You know, there's an old saying that nature abhors a vacuum, and that's true. For example, water. Boy, if you ever had water leaks, we had a crack in our basement, and the water was coming in, and you know, water will find a way. Water is water, electricity, heat, which are all forms of energy in one way, shape, or form. They go from where they are to where they aren't. Nature abhors a vacuum. You know, it wants everything nice and even. That's why, you know, temperatures constantly change. And the wind blows in an attempt to level the temperature everywhere. But of course, the sun is constantly heating up, and the sun goes down. You know, temperature goes up and down. But that's what wind is. Wind is strictly thermodynamics in its very most basic, simple form. When a fluid changes its form according to its container, energy changes according to the system that contains it. For example, the energy contained in food is chemical energy. And where? In the bonds, remember? In a battery, it's electrical energy. Actually, it's chemical. Because the chemicals in the battery which create the electrical energy, which is what you get from the battery. In the wind, you get mechanical energy. When you eat, you convert the chemical energy that you draw from your food into thermal energy. That's heat. And breaking those bonds in the foods that you eat generates the energy which enables you to function. And this maintains your body at 98.6 degrees, and it provides some energy to move your muscles and your heart to beat and your brain to think, hopefully. In a similar way, the hydraulic energy of a waterfall can be transformed into electrical power. The chemical energy of oil into thermal energy, the electrical energy of battery into mechanical energy, and so on. It is worth noting that these transformations from one form to another may be carried out directly or in stages. So, the first statement of this law, the energy cannot be created or destroyed, it only is transformed, was done by a German doctor, Dr. Mayer, M-A-Y-E-R, 1 year earlier, while he had been in Indonesia near the equator, he noticed that blood from the veins of sailors were redder than his patients in Germany. He established a link between the color of the blood and its oxygen content. The redder the blood, the more oxygen it contained. Makes sense. At the time, it was already accepted that oxygen was stored or used in the production of energy of living organisms, and he deduced that there was an excess amount of oxygen in the blood of sailors because they produced less energy. They produced less energy because they needed less. And they needed less simply because of the weather where they were was much warmer than elsewhere in the world. When it's hot outside, less energy is needed to maintain the body temperature 98.6. That makes sense. Therefore, in the blood of people from near the equator, there is more oxygen in the blood than Germans. There's a connection between the thermal and the chemical energy. They're mutably convertible. Now, if we imagine our body as a fantastic chemical factory, and it is beyond your comprehension and mine, and then consider the electricity bill for the energy consumed to keep that factory working, we would have to pay more or less the same amount each month. In other words, our personal need for energy is more or less constant. When our consumption energy fluctuates too much, our insides become disturbed. If we consume more energy than usual, we grow fatter. When we do not consume enough, we weaken. It weakens because we must draw energy from our reserves. And that's what your fat stores are in your body. The fat that is in your body is a chemical storage of energy in case of a drought. And I mean by a drought, the food coming into you. Although our energy needs are constant from adulthood to old age, the energy takes various forms and is used for various tasks. We use energy to heat our body, maintain it at 98.6, like a stew that simmers. Actually, it varies more than 3 or 4 degrees. If it varies more than 3 or 4 degrees, this stew will decompose and start to rot and stink. We also use energy to move our body, our arms, legs, fingers, open our mouth and eyes. Undeniably, part of this energy is invested in mental activity. The amount of energy your brain burns is phenomenal. It is tiring to concentrate for a long time at the office of school as it is playing on the computer or playing chess. Or even lying in bed thinking about everything. So how is your energy distributed? How much is used to maintain your body temperature? What percentage is invested in motion, in sport, or in studies, in anger, in joy, heat? Who controls it? If we could not control the form our energy takes, we would not be very different from a vegetable. We have a mind of our own, and it seems that at this stage, it makes a statement. Take advantage of this opportunity because it might not be available elsewhere. In this world, dominated by the laws of matter, our mind has only one lifetime and limited power. Excuse me. This power could be just to have a certain control of our energy. Thus, energy is convertible. It takes various forms but remains indestructible. How then can we speak about a world energy crisis if energy is indestructible? The answer is in the next chapter, but when we get to it, which will be in the next video. But before closing this chapter, consider one other facet of the law of the conservation of energy. Neither energy nor matter can disappear. Indeed, can you make an atom disappear? They are so small and so numerous you might be tempted to say yes, but how would you proceed? Would you break it? Would you hide it under the pillow? Would you launch it in the sky? Would you bury it in the ground? Once again, Einstein gives the answer. His famous formula, equals mc squared, stipulates that if mass disappeared from the universe, its departure would not go unnoticed. In fact, this would create a tremendous explosion and a tremendous amount of energy equal to mc squared, would be released. In other words, an energy equivalent to the mass multiplied by the square of the speed of light. In fact, any mass is a reservoir of energy, a special reservoir, because it disappears while being emptied of its contents. To make a very, very long story short, with the atomic weapons used in Japan, that's what it was. The actual amount of an atomic weapon, the actual amount of matter that is converted to energy is very small. It's in the ounces range, but it's a total conversion, and you know what the results of an atomic weapon are. For example, Einstein's formula stipulates if you were able to make a grain of salt disappear, the energy would be enough to destroy an entire building. The energy contained in an adult weighing 150 pounds would be equal to 1 billion tons of TNT. I'll repeat that. The energy contained in an average adult weighing 150 pounds would be the equivalent of 1 billion tons of TNT. That's mind-blowing. This energy is contained in the nucleus of our atoms. It can be released only if our atoms explode and disintegrate, and as you can imagine, this won't happen tomorrow. The disintegration of atoms is observed only in the cosmos and in special laboratories. The quantity of energy released during this reaction is exactly what Einstein's formula predicts. The law of conservation of matter was already known at the time of Van Meyer. It was expressed in the famous sentence by a guy named Lavoisier. I've seen this name many times, I never could pronounce it. It's Lavoisier. He was French. But his saying is, which is well known, is nothing is lost, nothing is created, all is transformed. He is often regarded as the father of modern chemistry. He was the first to introduce systematic use of scales in chemistry. So, in the first law of matter, nothing is lost, nothing is gained, nothing is transformed. If that law did not hold, we never could be sure we would be able to find lost keys. Sometimes they remain lost, at least for me. Or even that the bed that we went to sleep would be there in the morning when we woke up, if indeed we woke up. I am telling these fantasies to introduce you to the second law of matter, and to make you realize that even if the second law is lesser known than the first, it is no less fundamental. There are actually three major laws of which we will go through the next video. And after that, once again, this is a primer to understand what we're going to be talking about when we get into the heavier duty stuff of consciousness. You have to understand energy can't be created or destroyed. You have to understand what chemical bonds are. You have to understand how chemical reactions happen, or at least have a very fundamental understanding. It doesn't need to be in-depth. I'm not trying to make you a chemist. It was my first love, though I've been in electronics for 40 years. Chemistry was my first love, and probably always will be. But I made a fabulous living in electronics. So we will see you again on the next show, where we will talk about the second and third law of thermodynamics.